The U.S. national debt currently stands at a massive figure of $34.8 trillion. What does this mean? Roughly divided by the U.S. population of about 333 million, it equates to over $100,000 of national debt per person. However, more than this absolute number, the trend of the debt is our main concern. You don't need to be an economist to look at the charts and see that the debt curve is rising sharply. The most frightening part is that this situation is unsustainable, and the U.S. government literally cannot pay off this debt. Even the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, predicts that the situation will be worse than it is today in 10 years. So, where does this road lead, and is there a secret cheat code the U.S. can use to overcome this debt problem? How does borrowing work? Let's start with the basics. Just like us, a country gets into debt when it wants to spend more than its income, tax revenue. This difference is called a deficit. The larger the deficit, the more money the government needs to borrow. To borrow money, the government sells instruments known as treasury securities, or bonds. Investors, large corporations, foreign countries like Japan and China, and even the U.S. central bank, the Fed, lend money to the U.S. government by investing in these bonds. In return, the government promises to pay back the principal along with interest when the bond matures. Currently, the 10-year U.S. Treasury yield is around 4.3%, meaning borrowing is more expensive than it used to be. There's another interesting detail in this system. The Federal Reserve, Fed, can buy bonds, which is a way to effectively print money and inject it into the economy. This process can theoretically be used to stimulate the economy and increase tax revenues. The deficit leading to the debt spiral. The main reason a country borrows is that it spends more than it earns. We call this the annual deficit. If the government spends $4 trillion and only earns $3 trillion, it has to sell $1 trillion worth of bonds to cover the gap. The U.S. has not run an annual surplus since 2001. The annual deficit figures are continuously growing. This means that every year the government must sell more bonds, sinking deeper into debt. This is the primary reason why the national debt, which was around $10 trillion in 2001, has ballooned to an astonishing $34.8 trillion over the past 23 years. Budget breakdown and challenges. So, what is the government spending this money on? About half of its income comes from individual income taxes, with the rest coming from Social Security and Medicare taxes. When we look at expenditures, the largest items are Social Security, Medicare, defense, and interest payments. The problem lies right here. To close the deficit, the U.S. needs to either raise taxes, earn more, or cut spending, spend less, or both. But who wants to pay higher taxes, or who wants cuts to Social Security, healthcare, or the military budget? None of these options are politically popular. High interest rates worsen the problem. What is making the situation even worse is the high interest rates, unseen for over 2 decades. The Fed, aiming to curb high inflation in recent years, raised interest rates from 0% to about 5.5%. This has fundamentally shaken U.S. debt management. Borrowing has a maturity date. When old, low-interest debt matures, and the government can't find the money to pay it off and has to refinance the debt, it now has to do so at much higher interest rates. This rapidly increases the amount of interest the government has to pay each year. In the current fiscal year, interest payments have already become the 3rd largest expenditure category for the U.S. This is what we call the debt spiral. Rising interest payments push the government to borrow more, which further enlarges the debt pile and leads to even higher interest payments. The game of inflating away debt. Some people believe the U.S. should adopt a different approach to dissolve the debt, inflating away the debt with inflation. Imagine this. A home mortgage you took out in the 1970s for $24,000 seems tiny by today's salary and price standards, right? That's because inflation reduces the value of money. The theory suggests the government can do the same, accumulate a large pile of debt, and then allow inflation to devalue the currency. This would make it much easier to pay back that fixed interest debt with less valuable money in the future. The U.S. used this method after World War II to reduce its debt to GDP ratio. The dangers of the cheat code. While great in theory, in practice, it's not that simple. When you encourage inflation, you run the risk of it getting out of control. Uncontrolled inflation can lead to economic instability, social unrest, and in the worst-case scenario, the collapse or abandonment of a currency. Indeed, inflation rose too high in recent years, and the Fed had no choice but to intervene with rate hikes to try and stabilize the situation. So, the strategy of inflating away the debt actually clashed with the Fed's fight against inflation. This is why the Fed targets a stable inflation rate, like 2% instead of 0. This rate keeps the economy moving and at the same time helps the debt slowly erode over time. The sustainable solution. In light of all these methods and theories, the number one way for the U.S. to overcome its debt situation is a smart fiscal policy focused on reducing the deficit in the long term. Instead of seeking temporary relief by inflating away the debt, the most sustainable approach is to permanently put the nation's finances in order. This means focusing on becoming more productive, increasing tax revenues, and implementing austerity measures wherever they make sense. Difficult decisions must be made. Only then can a way out of the debt spiral be found.